Good morning, and thank you for being here. My name is Karen Cocq. I am with the Migrant Workers Alliance for Change, the Secretariat of the Migrant Rights Network. I will be emceeing today's press conference. Bonjour à tous et merci d'être ici avec nous. Je m'appelle Karen Cocq et je suis avec l'Alliance des travailleurs et travailleuses migrants. Je serai la maître de cérémonie. Un de nos présentateurs parle en français, alors s'il y a des questions pour elle à la fin, merci. We are here today at the House of Commons to demand an immediate end to the immigration cuts, systemic exploitation, and racist rhetoric that we are seeing. This afternoon, Immigration Minister Mark Miller will appear before the Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration to present Canada's immigration levels for 2025 to 2027. The Levels Plan will introduce historic cuts to temporary and permanent immigration that, coming on the heels of an avalanche of new restrictions over the last 18 months, will expel 2.3 million people from Canada over the next 2 years. Today, we will hear from those who will be most affected by these cuts. Workers for whom the new immigration rules under which they came to Canada have been suddenly changed, and workers to whom the Trudeau government made promises of fairness and equality that it has now broken. And we will hear from advocates who will make clear that these changes are unfairly scapegoating migrants and to demand that this government instead ensure equality and fairness. Just last month, 180 civil society organizations representing 5.8 million people in Canada signed an open letter to the government to say that there is a consensus on the need for permanent residency and full rights for migrant and undocumented people. First speaker, we have Sarom Rho, who is a spokesperson for the Migrant Rights Network, the largest coalition of migrant-led groups in the country, including farm workers, care workers, and domestic workers, current and former international students, and undocumented migrants. Sarom.
Good morning. My name is Sarom Rho. I'm from the Migrant Rights Network. We are here today to condemn the massive policy cuts to immigration over the last 18 months. Temporary Foreign Workers Program, cut. International Student Program, cut. Postgraduate Work Permit eligibility, cut. Refugee protections, cut. Permanent residency, cut. Families, cut. These are heartless and ham-fisted, conservative-like policies to immigration. These policies will result in over 2.3 million people being expelled over the next 2 years and will multiply the immense power imbalance that employers, landlords, and recruiters have over migrants and undocumented people. Today, we call on all political parties and the federal government to reject racism and to immediately reverse the plans to slash immigration, and to collectively commit to fairness and equality for all, as it promised to do multiple times over the last 9 years. This afternoon, Immigration Minister Mark Miller will appear before a parliamentary committee to present his Levels Plan. We are here to say to him that migrants are more than numbers on a table, or figures to be used as election bluster, or taps to be turned on or off at the Prime Minister's whim. We have real lives, real faces. We are here to bear witness and to be seen. There's the care worker who has been here for years, but is now going to lose the chance to reunite with her own family because of these changes. A new program was announced this summer, but thousands are left in a lurch as no details have been announced since. There's the international student who is working long hours and studying at the same time, but is still struggling to afford the skyrocketing costs of a living and unregulated tuition fees. There's the farm worker who endures unsafe working conditions and living conditions and is unable to speak out against exploitation in fear of the constant threat of deportation. The worker who cannot qualify for permanent residency because provincial nominee programs have been gutted and federal express entry draws are infrequent and arbitrary. Fewer permanent residency spots means that there will be more temporariness and temporary workers, which means that we are more vulnerable to abuse. There's the refugee who tries to come here but is pushed away because of changes to visa rules and needs to wait for years to have their applications heard. There are people who are forced to leave their jobs and live in daily fear that they will be torn apart from their homes and loved ones here because their permits are expiring. We are told by the Liberal government and the Conservative opposition that these changes are happening because public support for immigration is dwindling. But why are people turning on migrants and immigrants, some of the most vulnerable people in society? Why is a small minority blaming the most vulnerable people for the affordability crisis? Permanent residents and citizens are also experiencing massive food insecurity and uncertainty about the future, and they're being told to blame migrants. These are divide and distract tactics. They hide the fact that the super rich are making record-breaking profits while the majority of us go hungry, that corporate landlords are buying up housing stock to manufacture scarcity, and that the public institutions we value so deeply, like healthcare and education, are being chopped up and sold by the pound to private profiteers. Politicians at every level, the media and right-wing forces, have been scapegoating us. And by reducing immigration, Prime Minister Trudeau is affirming the racist idea that migrants are responsible for the affordability and housing crises. These cuts mean that college and university administration can renege on commitments to ensure decent and safe study, work, and living conditions on campus. Already they're coming to the bargaining table, refusing to hire educators on good contracts, refusing to build housing on campuses or fund mental health resources. This is happening at the same time that the presidents of the biggest universities in the country are taking and pocketing nearly $500,000 every year. These cuts are bad policy moves that are morally wrong and economically short-sighted. Migrants aren't taking jobs and homes. We feed the economy, raise it, we grow it. We bring money into the country and we spend money. We pay into public services that we are denied access to, like employment insurance and healthcare. Without us, the social welfare net would collapse. Regularizing undocumented people would put billions into the public purse. Minister Miller himself said that it would grow the economy more than an oil pipeline would. But shutting us out will cause a social and economic crisis that no GST holiday can fix. Cuts to immigration do not serve any of our collective interests. They further racism, and they do not resolve the housing and affordability crisis. We demand immediate and bold action from Prime Minister Trudeau and Immigration Minister Miller. Reverse the cuts. Ensure regularization for all undocumented people and permanent resident status for all migrants. Protect workers and our families from exploitation. Fund housing, healthcare, and social infrastructure so that all of us, migrants and citizens alike, can thrive. This is what fairness and justice looks like, and that is what it takes to keep moving forward together. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarom. Next, we have Michèle Biss with the National Right to Housing Network.
I am angry about the proposed immigration cuts. I am angry as a human rights advocate, and I am angry as a housing advocate, because this is a distraction from the policies, laws, and programs that could turn the tide of Canada's housing crisis. Experts have told government time and time again that the housing crisis is driven by factors like underinvestment in non-market housing, like social, nonprofit, and cooperative housing, lack of regulation of investors who treat housing as a commodity rather than as a human right, and a severe lack of protections for renters experiencing rent evictions, discrimination, unreasonable rent hikes, and more. The federal government and Minister Sean Fraser of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities and former Minister of Immigration knows this. Just last spring, the federal budget introduced important steps to address the housing crisis. They introduced funding to support tenant organizing and research and policy solutions to support tenants. They made a substantial new investment in non-market housing. They created a $250 million encampment response program for municipalities who implement rights-based solutions like affordable housing investment that people experiencing homelessness can actually afford. they began to develop a Renters' Bill of Rights. And this government in 2019 passed Canada's first right to housing legislation, the National Housing Strategy Act. This legislation creates mechanisms like a federal housing advocate, National Housing Council, and review panels that help us find the root causes of the housing crisis and identify policy solutions. Because over 235,000 people in Canada are experiencing homelessness. Shelters everywhere are far and above capacity, with some experiencing homelessness setting up in encampments because there is nowhere else that they can go. Much is said about how asylum seekers are in shelters, but this is not an immigration problem. It is an affordable housing problem and an underfunding problem. The real issue at the core of this crisis is that Canada doesn't have enough affordable housing supply, especially in urban areas, and that housing doesn't have adequate renter protections. On top of this, there is a labor shortage in the trades to build new affordable housing. Immigration plays a vital role in the solutions to the housing crisis and is not the cause of it. I want to be unequivocally clear. This global trend of treating the housing crisis and affordability crisis on migrants is a dangerous distraction. It takes away from the real solutions to Canada's housing crisis. Migrants, international students, refugees, temporary foreign workers, and undocumented people are not responsible for Canada's housing, economic, or infrastructure challenges. We can do so much better than this. Today, I join my colleagues in calling on Canada's political leaders, including Prime Minister Trudeau, to stop the immigration cuts, systemic exploitation, and racist rhetoric, and to get back on track to focus on the real systemic causes of Canada's housing crisis.
Next, we will hear from Monieya Jess, an undocumented former migrant farm worker and member of the Migrant Workers Alliance for Change.
Hi, my name is Monieya Jess, and I am undocumented. I'm here fighting for status for everyone, every migrant in this country. I came here as a migrant farm worker, and I was physically and verbally mistreated. I work on a strawberry farm in Nova Scotia called Millins Farm. They don't treat us like human, and I was refused medical attention when I got injured at work. I have 2 sons. And I came to Canada to provide for my family, but bad treatment forced me to leave the farm. This is the reality of many migrant farm workers. I am a member of the Migrant Workers Alliance for Change. I know many farm workers and other migrant workers who are also facing abuse and violence. This is the reality. It is what the United Nations has called contemporary slavery. We know that it is what many migrant farm workers are facing. Now the federal government and the media is saying that we are the cause. We are responsible for the housing crisis. We did not cause the crisis. We live in some of the worst houses, and we pay the highest rents. The government is saying temporarily foreign workers' work permit will not be renewed. Tens of thousands of people like me will be forced to leave. We came to this country, we bought money and we spent money here, and now they're saying, go away. We are human beings, not chewing gums, to spit out when you are done with us. Justin Trudeau calling us a tap to turn off and on when he likes. But I'm standing here to say I am a person, I have feelings, I deserve rights. We are the farm worker that feed you. We are not the ones who get the money when the grocery store raises their food prices. Blaming us is racist. The real problem are the big business. I became undocumented when I left the farm. Life without status and being separated from my family affects my mental health, and I can't have access to health care. I went to the hospital, and they told me not to come back until I have a health card. It is like they're telling us to stay sick. I am struggling to get a job. Bosses don't pay non-status people because they know we don't have papers. Without papers, we are blowing in the wind and can't hold on to anything. Our family depends on us, but nobody will hire us. And it is hard to survive. We can't build a better life for ourselves or our families. When everything has been taken away from us, we deserve fairness and equality. We are demanding status for all and an end to deportation. All of us are fighting for same thing, not just my voice alone today, but thousands of us without status. We are already living here. Without migrants, there's no Canada. We need status. I want Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to act on this promise of regularization he made nearly 3 years ago. He knows it is good for the economy, and it is good for migrants. He doesn't want to do it because he now says people don't support immigrants. But people don't support immigrants because all of the politicians and the media has been saying that we raised the rent and took the jobs, but we don't set the rent. The landlords do. We just like other citizens. Today, the immigration minister is going to committee to talk about the new immigration plans. I am calling on the politicians, party, all of you, to do the right thing. Reject this plan, turn away from being racist and blaming immigrants. I'm asking the Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to grant us status for all undocumented, status for farm workers, status for all migrants now. Thank you.
Next, we will hear from Novjot Salaria. Novjot is a member of the Postgraduate Work Permit Holders Committee and the Naujawan Support Network, an organization of international students and migrant workers fighting exploitation who have had a 24/7 encampment set up in Brampton since August 30th of 2024.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Novjot Salaria. I came here in Canada in 2021 as an international student. After studying from York University, I got postgraduate work permit and I started working in an IT company at a big bank. So I am one of 200,000 postgraduate work permit holders in Canada whose work permits are expiring in 2024 and 2025. International students were sold the Canadian dream by government, colleges, and their recruiters with the slogan, study, explore, work, and stay. Our families suffered everything, selling land, taking on debt, and paying high tuition fees to make this dream a reality. During COVID, we supported the economy by taking on essential and unsafe jobs many Canadians avoided and were not willing to take. Not only that, international students contribute $30 billion annually to Canada's economy through tuition, rent, and taxes. But recent changes to PR eligibility and the closure of some of the important provincial programs have left many of us in limbo. The Trudeau government changed the goalpost without any regard for how it would affect many of us without grandfathering current and former international students into the new policies. International students with expiring work permits are now being forced to pursue other ways to stay in Canada, such as applying for visitor records, buying bonded labor contracts by LMIAs, re-enrolling to exploitative colleges, and in some cases applying for refugee claims. Meanwhile, we are being scapegoated for housing and job crisis. We are labeled as criminals and frauds. So sometimes I just wonder that was it not long ago that international students were the solution to labor shortage and required for the growth of economy in Canada, and all of a sudden international students became the problem. So international students and migrant workers are humans too, who seek to live and work in dignity, just like any other Canadian. That is why we formed our PGWP committee of affected international students and graduates. Over the last 8 months, we have been organizing public gatherings, meeting with MPs and MPPs, and conducting public protests to raise awareness about Canada's use and throw policy. But left with no other option, we started a 24/7 encampment protest on August 30th near the busiest highway in Brampton to build public support and push for our demands. Today is our 88th day, and I am one of those living and protesting under the open sky. So far, we have received widespread support from the community members, including Canadian citizens, faith-based organizations like Ontario Gurdwara Committee, and trade unions such as Unifor QP Ontario, UPSU, and Ontario Federation of Labour. Our demands are simple and logical. We ask the Canadian government to act swiftly on one, granting work permit extension to those whose work permits are expiring in 2024 and 2025, ensure a fair pathway to permanent residency, and end labor market assessment-based exploitation. As of the heart of this issue is whether Canada chooses to treat international students and immigrant workers with respect for their labor and contribution to this country's economy, or instead as a disposable item to be used, scapegoated, and discarded. From Komagata Maru to Chinese head text, we have historical evidences of an exploitative immigration policy and system. We hope that our government will not have to apologize for their actions 100 years from now, just as they did for Komagata Maru. To Prime Minister Trudeau and Minister Mark Miller, we ask you to do the right thing today by extending the work permits and ensuring a fair pathway, a fair chance for the permanent residency to postgraduate work permit holders.
We will now hear from Diana Gallego, President of the Canadian Council for Refugees.
Thank you. In a shameful abdication of responsibility, the Canadian government has massively reduced its commitment to offer protection to those fleeing persecution and danger in the world, and has further complicated the right to family reunification for refugees in Canada who will remain separate from their spouse and children for years to come. The Canadian Council for Refugees calls for a reversal of the government's course at a time when Canada should be fulfilling its role as a leader in the world stage. We are now shrinking away from our responsibilities, and we are failing our humanitarian and welcoming values that define our country. While we are seeing the immigration levels that are being discussed today, cuts in the humanitarian component of the immigration levels were deep and across the board. The only levels that remain the same as announced last year are those for government-assisted refugees, known as AGARs, and just over 15,000, but even this number is a reduction from previous years and a drop in the bucket of the growing number of displaced people around the world. It is also far below Canada's actual capacity to resettle refugees. Refugees being resettled from overseas already often wait more than 3 years. The 5,000 in cuts announced for private sponsored refugees, a baffling decision considering all the costs for applicants in this category are covered by private citizens, will now mean even longer waits, often in situations where their lives are at risk. The cuts to the numbers for protected persons and their dependents abroad were comparatively much deeper than the overall immigration level cuts, slashed by 31% compared to 21% overall. These are not just numbers. In 2025 alone, these cuts mean 9,000 people will be denied permanent residency and security in Canada, with a backlog in this category of over 100,000 active applications. The 2020 numbers are signaling that only 1 out of every 5 refugees and family members, some of whom have already been waiting for over 4 years, will get permanent status and be able to move on with their lives. The cuts are at odds with what the people in this country want and what this country is capable of. Canada is a world renowned for the know-how, skills, and systems to welcome and set up refugees for success. The solutions are at the hand and need only to be scaled up. From the crisis in Syria to Afghanistan to Ukraine, every year communities and families privately sponsor more refugees than the government brings, a sign of public support that puts the cuts to the levels to shame. Canadians want well-managed system for fair and compassionate immigration, and they want and deserve access to affordable and accessible housing and other core services. These aspirations are not in competition with each other, and it is disappointing to witness the pitting of Canadians against future Canadians to justify an ill-advised change in immigration and refugee protection policy. I also want to address some of the things we have been hearing since the cuts were announced. The implications that some temporary residents will now fraudulently claim asylum. They are trying to game the system, are dangerous, and fail to recognize the complexity of people's lives. The Immigration and Refugee Board needs support to handle increased volumes. They are fully capable of determining claims on their merits and should be the only ones deciding on the validity of a claim. Ultimately, this is a procedural fairness and rule of law matter. Country context can also change, and people have a right to seek protection if they need it. Finally, we note with concern announcements about potential expansions to the Safety Country Agreement with the United States. Any changes to the Safety Country Agreement must be made in consultation with those of us who work with refugees and refugee claimants. We welcome discussions, but maintain that Canada should withdraw from the Safety Country Agreement to ensure that individuals seeking refuge can do so without risking their lives. Thank you.
Final remarks will be from Viviana Medina from the Immigrant Workers Centre in Montreal.
Alors, bonjour. Nous sommes sérieusement préoccupés pour les nouvelles mesures que le gouvernement fédéral a mises en place, dont les modifications portant sur différents programmes d'immigration temporaire et la baisse du seuil canadien, permanent d'immigration canadienne. Ces politiques punissent les personnes qui sont déjà abusées, exploitées, harcelées et aggravent leur vie. Nous sommes ici parce que les travailleurs, travailleuses migrants, les étudiants internationaux et les demandeurs d'asile sont directement attaqués et leurs chances de rester dans les pays ont été gravement touchées. Brisent ainsi leur projet de vie et leurs rêves d'avenir. Ces mesures ne feront qu'accroître la précarité des travailleurs, travailleuses migrants déjà vulnérables au Canada et continueront d'alimenter les discours discriminatoires. Il y a seulement 2 ans, ces mêmes personnes migrantes ont été désignées comme les travailleurs, travailleuses essentiels et décrits comme les anges gardiens au Québec. Au bout de 2 années à peine, les discours publics font des personnes migrantes les boucs émissaires face à des faillites de politiques publiques comme l'échec du contrôle des prix des logements à l'offre des logements sociaux et en justifiant en même temps les politiques d'austérité et de coupure dans le secteur public. Nous demandons au gouvernement du Canada de cesser de faire des étudiants étrangers, des réfugiés et des travailleurs-travailleuses migrants les boucs émissaires sur le plan économique. Il faut reconnaître qu'ils ne sont pas la cause de la crise, mais qu'ils apportent une contribution essentielle au Canada. Par ailleurs, il faut mettre en place des mesures solides pour protéger les droits de tous les travailleurs-travailleuses, avec des sanctions réelles sur les employeurs qui exploitent la main-d'œuvre migrante et abusent leurs droits. Nous espérons, nous, les personnes migrantes et immigrants, méritons d'être traités avec dignité et respect. Nous demandons plus concrètement d'arrêter la mise en application des dernières mesures aux personnes présentes au Canada et de garantir leur accès à la résidence permanente, de mettre en place immédiatement les programmes de régularisation complet, inclusif, ainsi que la suspension immédiate des déportations et détentions, et d'abolir les permis de travail fermés et assurer l'accès à la résidence permanente de tous les travailleurs et travailleuses temporaires. Nous, les centres de travailleurs et travailleuses immigrants, aussi membres de l'Alliance internationale des migrants, on appelle à les organisations migrantes et leurs alliés à organiser les actions et des activités dans la date du 18 décembre, Journée internationale des migrants. Nous proposons aux personnes migrantes de prendre un jour congé, d'organiser des rassemblements et des forums publics, des discussions communautaires et des campagnes de rédaction de lettres, de pétitions et des autres activités pour souligner leurs droits en tant qu'êtres humains, ainsi que leur contribution à notre société. Arrêtons et montrons la force de nous. Merci.
Thank you. This concludes the press conference. Merci, c'est ce qui conclut la conférence.